Okay, take it away.
Hey, everybody, this is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman back here with you for the 96th Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition Zoom call, or the GREE-GREE call. We have 70 people with us already. We are going to be talking today, as usual, as always, about the dire straits that our election situation is in. We are nonpartisan. We are talking about fairness. We're talking about gerrymandering, denial of the right to vote, voting machines in New York, and a whole lot of other stuff that's really, really disturbing. We're going to devote the first hour to that, although we're going to start with Chuck O'Neill, who's won a major victory, a legal victory for the environment. We have Pat Morita with us also. Pat is going to talk to us about a nuclear thing in Ohio, of the latest travesty from the Ohio legislature. Pat, if it's possible, good to see you, Pat. If it's possible to do this in the second hour, we're going to devote that to the environment entirely, and I can start in the second hour with you, or if you need to go, you can introduce us right off the top. Just let me know. So the first hour, we're going to be deep in talking about the denial of the right to vote and many other things, and we're joined again, but having to do with elections, and we're joined once more by BRYNN TANNEHILL, brilliant author and expert on elections and the coming of fascism in this country, which is really rolling down the tracks like a freight train. And so that will be the nub of our first hour, and there is just way more to discuss, especially about gerrymandering, than I'd like to admit. This is a truly terrifying time. I will say that I watched Newt Gingrich the other day basically threaten the January 6th committee that when the Republicans take over, they're going to go in prison. As you recall, Trump's yell to Hillary, lock her up. We're hearing more of that. And BRYNN will talk to us a bit about that as well. In the second hour, we are going to be joined by the great DANNY SHEEHAN and Tatanka Bricca, our co-convener, along with Wendy Liederman, Ron Leonard, and hopefully Pat Morita will talk to us about what's happening with the environment, the insane attempt to extend the operating lives of these nuclear power plants, including the two at Diablo Canyon, directly upwind from Los Angeles, which is scheduled through a great a deal that was made to shut down in 2024 and 25, and which they're now trying to roll back. It's just completely beyond the pale. Here's my No Nukes T-shirt to keep us in the mood, and so there's, you know, as Brecht once said, he who laughs has never heard the bad news. So we're going to have to deal with that. Nancy, we'll talk with your friend or your sister, I guess, in Alaska about the congressional candidate known as Santa Claus as well. We have been promising Chuck O'Neill. We're going to start now. As I said, we're going to break at 6, and Tatanka is going to come in with DANNY SHEEHAN. We'll talk about Biden actually did something good for the renewable energy today. It's a very big deal on solar panels and lifting of some legal barriers. So there will be some good news. But boy, looking at the electoral scene, looking at what's being done to our electoral process, man, it's pretty grim. So we're going to start first with Chuck O'Neill. You're in Florida, Chuck. We'll give you 5 to 10 minutes. If you can tell us exactly about this legal victory that you've won for the environment, that'll get us off on a strong note. So please go right ahead. Chuck O'Neill, are you with us? Are you unmuted?
I'm unmuted now. Thank you, Harvey. Appreciate
Okay, if you can speak up, we need you to be a little louder.
Okay, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right, super. We're on the verge of finding out whether it's a victory or not, Harvey. Just to go back and recap where we're at right now, we pushed through what's called a Rights of Nature Charter Amendment in Orange County and got it on the ballot in November of 2020. even though it was a very divisive election, as you remember, this was Trump versus Biden, we were able to get 89% of the vote on this Rights of Nature Charter Amendment. And what it did was it created a body of law in our charter, which is kind of in Orange County, Florida, kind of like a constitution, where all the natural water bodies had four rights: the right to exist, the right to flow, the right to be protected against pollution, and the right to maintain a healthy ecosystem. So these four rights are now in our, if you look it up in the Muni Code, it's in our charter. And we use this to file the first Rights of Nature enforcement action against the Florida Department of Environmental Protection and a developer who are looking to fill in over 100 acres of wetlands. So this is the suit we brought back in April of 2021. There have been motions to dismiss back and forth. There has been also an amended complaint and amended motions to dismiss. So they all went to hearing on April 26th of this year, the hearing on the motions to dismiss. And the real partial victory is the judge, the circuit court judge, did not immediately dismiss the case. She's allowed us and the defendants to prepare a final order each. And we are awaiting her decision on that matter. So if we're able to survive, it will be the first time a U.S. court has upheld the rights of nature law in this country. As you probably well know, that Ecuador has had a rights of nature clause in their constitution since 2008. Ecuador has had over 60 cases brought under that rights of nature clause. India just recently acknowledged the rights of all its rivers, as well as Pakistan. So this is a movement that's happening around the world. But as you well know, the United States is not like the rest of the world. It's largely, our regulatory agencies are largely dominated by commerce and industry, and it's very hard to break through. So we're waiting and patiently for the judge to decide which way she's going to go, whether she's going to go with the defendant's motion, final order, or with our final order. And at that point, I'm sure Wendy will put us back in touch and we'll read the entire final order and go through it with you, hopefully on one of these great meetings that you're having.
And what court is hearing this?
It's the Ninth Judicial Circuit Court in Florida. So this is in Circuit Civil Court here in Florida.
And it's a state court, not a federal court.
It's a state court, yes, it is.
So who's taking the opposition? Who is saying that nature should not have rights?
Well, it's kind of funny. We're suing the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which does anything but that. And Harvey, the real eye opener is the Florida Department of Environmental Protection is using public resources to defend the developer in this case, who wants to destroy over 100 acres of wetlands in the state. So it just kind of shows you where we're at least in Florida. I'm sure the rest of the country might be a little bit different, but we have a very notorious governor here right now who kind of pulls the strings.
Weirdly enough, Ron DeSantis signed a veto against the bill to destroy solar power in Florida. So,
Yeah.
To me, that's a good sign that the solar industry is gaining a lot of power. Chuck, it's really brilliant stuff. Please put all citations in the chat. I hope you can join us in the second hour with the great Danny Sheehan, and I welcome you to reintroduce what you've just said, so that we're all in the same wavelength. Okay?
Great.
Thank
you,
you,
Harvey.
Chuck. We have more than 90 people on the call. I want to welcome Julie Weiner. We do have BRYNN TANNEHIll up to speak on the coming of fascism here. But speaking of which, Julie Weiner, can you tell us what's happened in New York? I want to thank Pat Morita, by the way, for sticking with us. Pat will join us in the second hour to discuss this insane nuclear bill that the Ohio legislature is putting through. I think all of you know that, as in many other state legislatures, the Ohio legislature requires a lobotomy to join. So it's amazing what they've come up with. Julie Weiner, can you tell us what's going on in New York, please? And Mike Fox, if you're with us, you'll give us a quick rundown on Tuesday's primaries. Mike Fox, but first we'll go to Julie Weiner.
Hi, thank you. Well, I'll share some minor good news first, although it's being very, very broadly celebrated in New York. The John R. Lewis Voting Right Acts of New York State passed both the Senate and the Assembly, so it's waiting for Governor Hochul's signature. This bill requires review of changes to election access laws and voting procedures in counties or locales that have a history of discrimination. So that's, in terms of access to the ballot, that's good news. The bad news, unfortunately, is that the hybrid ban bill, also known as the Protect Our Ballots Act, was, like many of the excellent voting rights bills, passed by the New York State Senate and died in the Election Law Committee and was never added to the agenda by Speaker Hasty. So even though, you know, there'll be ballot access, there's really no right anymore to have your votes counted as cast, because failing to pass this bill means that the New York State election laws that govern voting machine requirements do not require that voting machines be unable to print over ballots after they're cast, do not require that voters be allowed to vote by hand marking their ballots in polling places. So the failure to pass the bill clears the way for the certification and purchase of the ES&S Express Vote Excel, which is a universal use ballot marking device. It prints a ballot differently shaped from hand-marked ballots. So if it's used at all in a location, it has to be used by all voters, which means that voters in New York State who have been used to voting for the last more than a decade on hand-marked paper ballots will no longer have that right. And in many locales, particularly we expect New York City, if the Express Vote Excel is certified, which there's now no legislative bar to certifying it, probably New York City voters will be very surprised to find themselves lined up behind voting machines, touch screen voting machines, on which they have to mark their ballots one at a time, instead of dozens of people taking a pen and marking their ballots and then just slipping it through a standalone scanner. So we're in trouble in a cybersecurity environment where every computer can be hacked and voting machines are computers. And there's no rule now that prevents voting machines being used where, if the ballot itself is hacked, the ballots become unverifiable. Where if the printer is hacked, the ballots can make the elections completely unverifiable, even when there are hand counts. The bill also will allow for the further distribution of the already certified. The failure of the bill allows for the further distribution by two other counties of the Dominion ICE, which is at least allows for hand-marked paper ballots, but it also has this security flaw discovered several years ago by election security researchers that allows ballots after they're cast to be physically allows ballots after they're cast to be marked over, because the ballot path goes under the printer. So there were a number of other good bills that were passed by the Senate that failed in the Assembly, that were just pocketed by Assembly Speaker Hasty and by the election law chair, Latrice Walker. There was a wonderful bill that passed the Senate that would have given the Board of Elections discretion to reject the use of voting machines or systems on the grounds that they are not proper, safe, or secure. There was a bill that passed the Senate that would have allowed for availability of electronic ballot images within a week of any election. Oh, there was one good bill that a lot of our allies are supported strongly, that requires that affidavit ballots be counted of eligible voters if they appear at a polling place in the right county, but the incorrect election district. So that at least, again, that's a good ballot access. That's a good access to the polls bill. If people show up in the right county now, their ballot can be counted if they're eligible voters. That is, their affidavit ballot can be counted if they're eligible voters.
Okay.
And so,
Julie, if you'll put your contacts in the chat, please.
sure,
I know
happy
you're on
to.
top of the case. There's a lot of issues in New York.
There are a lot, yeah. You can. I'll just say it out loud too for other people who want to reach me, who can just hear me. I'm at jwvoting@gmail.com. I'm Julie
jwvoting@gmail.com. Julie does spectacular work in New York. I know there's been a big issue
we do our
with
best.
gerrymandering.
I'm with Citizens for Voting Integrity New York. I'm putting that cbiny.org and smartelections.us, or rather smartlegislation.org, which is the lobbying group, and Let New York Vote. We've got a number of coalitions. Common Cause was working on this as well. So we had a lot of groups working on it. But I forgot to mention the coup de grace was against on the hybrid ban bill, and in favor of specifically of the express vote Excel was administered by Dr. Hazel Dukes of the NAACP state conference. She fell in love with the express vote Excel and about a year ago, and has been promoting it ever since, and wrote a letter in opposition at the last minute. But
Julie, thank you so much. Thank you for your great work in New York. Please put your contacts in. Stay with us through this hour, if you will. One more presentation before we bring on BRYNN TANNEHILL. Mike Fox, are you with us? Mike, are you going to give us a heads up here on tomorrow's primaries in California? Mike
Indeed,
Fox,
Sluggo. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Sluggo?
Yes, I can. Go
Wonderful. My apologies. The camera and I just aren't seeing eye to eye today. Just very briefly, gang. Huge election in California. Turnout is absolutely abysmal. We've got a boatload of really great progressive candidates. And if we spent just half of the time, just 1 hour, half of the time that we'll spend on this call, after this call, there is no question we can have an effect by hitting the phones in targeted districts. I just would ask everyone to remember right now someone who is totally on board with all of our issues, and that is Jessica Cisneros in Texas, is 150 votes down. 150 in a 50,000 plus election. Now, we got 100 people on this call. If 100 people got on a phone for an hour on a dialer, you're looking at well in excess of 1,500 conversations. Could we have found 150 votes in 1,500 conversations? There's no question. So I'm about to toss into the chat the way that you can get involved on the phone tonight and tomorrow, and hope to see folks there. Thanks for the time, Sluggo.
Hi, Mike Fox. Thank you. You're a whirlwind of energy, and very, very important, these California primaries. So anybody in or even outside California, please check out how to plug in. We really appreciate it. Okay, Eric Lazarus, you have a hand real quick, and then we're going to go to BRYNN TANNEHILL. Eric Lazarus, go ahead.
Yes, Julie, who makes the final decisions on what machines will actually be acquired in New York? Can we still keep those terrible hybrid ES&S machines out, even if we don't have a law. Thanks so much.
Hey, Eric, can we get to that after our guest, because she has a hard stop when she has to leave. So we'll circle back. That's
Okay.
a great question.
Yes, we appreciate it, Eric, and we know you're a New Yorker, so you're on target. Okay, the sun has come out here in sunny New Jersey, and you can see me now. BRYNN TANNEHIll, you have a great book out. You've talked with us before. I'd like you to start, if you would. The New York Times has been running a scorecard on gerrymandering, and it appears that the maps that the Republicans are putting forward are dominating going to be dominating the House elections, certainly in Ohio and in Florida, which accounts for a lot of congressional seats. Can you give us an idea about that, and then move ahead? We have 98 people on the call.
So gerrymandering is pretty bad to begin with. It is fundamentally undemocratic and yields a political system that is completely resistant to change, regardless of how people vote. Obviously, that's a bad thing. Even the Supreme Court in Gill versus Whitford said this is bad, but what are you going to do about it? Which that's even worse. Perhaps even worse than gerrymandering is the fundamental rural-urban split in the United States today. Where you can see that at this point, there is about a 7-point advantage for Republicans in the Senate, which is to say that for Democrats to have a 50-50 split in the Senate, they would have to win the national vote by about 7 percentage points, 3 elections in a row. Worse than that, to get to a filibuster-proof 60 seats in the Senate, they would need to win 3 cycles in a row by something approaching 17 or 18 points. Obviously not feasible. And on top of that, then you have all the stuff that's going on surrounding Republicans trying to ensure that they have people in place such that they can overturn any election results that they don't like, particularly with an eye towards 2024, to either refuse to certify it in the House, send false electors, refuse to certify election results at the state level or the district level with partisans. So that's going to be ugly. And they have a 6-3 Supreme Court with which to, if they manage to get that far via electoral shenanigans or political shenanigans or electoral college shenanigans, this Supreme Court, you can't exactly trust them not to just throw up in his hands and say, well, what are you going to do? We don't know. Well, it's obviously unfair and wrong, but it's technically legal. So, okay. And that's what we're facing in 2024. I struggle to find a plausible scenario in which Joe Biden remains president into 2025. The only plausible one I've come up with is that somehow Donald Trump and DeSantis run against each other. DeSantis wins the Republican nomination. Trump refuses to concede, and it splits the Republican tickets. That's kind of the only vaguely plausible scenario I can come up with where Democrats manage to hang on. The other thing that I should mention is because of the same things that give Republicans this huge advantage in the Senate, they have a huge advantage in the Electoral College. Looking at the data, Biden would have to win, or a Democrat would have to win the popular vote by somewhere between 4 and 5 points in the 2024 election to have a 50-50 shot of winning the Electoral College. These are not great numbers, particularly given Biden's polling, given that the Republican Party is now latched onto perpetual culture war forever. There's other things that are happening with LGBT issues right now that you're probably not delving into, but the rhetoric being used is particularly alarming for someone, especially someone who's got some background in the Germany from 1928 to 1937-38 time period. So yeah, I'm tracking a lot of things that are particularly ugly. And I haven't talked about the 2022 election yet, which is this is probably our last off ramp to normalcy. And the odds are extremely slim. Democrats, to restore voting rights, are going to need to retain the House of Representatives. They're going to need to win all 5 of the Cook Report Senate contests that they rate as toss-ups in order to get a 2-seat majority in the House, in order to pass a voting rights and electoral college protection and presidential election integrity bills, which is going to require the filibuster coming down, in order to prevent electoral shenanigans by Republicans. But even if they do that, right, or you still run into the problem of the 4 to 5 point advantage Republicans have based off of the electoral college. So these right now, what I am seeing is very much we're fighting the battle of the Alamo here. The odds are pretty ugly. I've got a series of 5 articles coming out in the New Republic over the next couple of weeks that talk about what it's going to take and how slim those odds are. And then it's going to talk about, well, what are the outcomes that potentially come afterwards? What a post-democracy America looks like, and what the limited and ugly number of options on the table are for people who don't want to live in a non-democratic America. And the worst part is that there is every reason to believe that if the United States is like the rest of the world, that we will simply slip into illiberal democracy or competitive authoritarianism quietly, the same way that Hungary and Russia have over the past 20 years. These are not heartening results, and as a LGBT person, I'm not exactly planning on sticking around for what's coming next. To something that people have talked about, lawsuits and so forth, to try and, as a remedy, I would remind you that one of the Masha Gessen's 3 rules for surviving autocracy is your institutions will not save you. Eventually, they, under non-democratic rule, they will be corrupted, and they are no longer a remedy for injustice or to for anything. The institutions eventually will come to, no matter who they are, will eventually serve the ruling party with no opportunity to remove them or change them through legal, peaceful means. And this is the terrifying reality that we face today. And there are a very, very limited number of options of what to do, what you can do, what's feasible once democracy has slipped away.
Okay. What is the title of your book, BRYNN? You can show us.
So I don't have a copy in front of me. I just gave away my last copy to a friend of mine who was in town. It's American Fascism, How the GOP is Subverting Democracy. I will post the link to purchase it from my publisher. You can also get it on Amazon, though I don't recommend that. I'm working on a 4th book currently that I've got. It's going to be titled "It Will Happen Here: Life in a Post-Democracy America." That's
the
and it
question
looks.
then is, how do we prevent this? How do we stop this from happening? We do, you know, have people who are out there. In my world, I think the biggest barrier to democracy or saving it is the lame nature of the Democratic Party. We just saw in Texas where Nancy Pelosi comes in and supports Henry Cuellar, who's basically a right-wing Republican, for God's sakes, anti-choice, anti-environment, all that stuff. What but we still have a certain amount of time until the 2022 election. And people, raise your hand and chime in here for free, please. There are 99 of us on the call. BRYNN, what steps can we take to avert disaster in 2022?
So Democrats are going to have to find a message that resonates. Right now, they're getting eaten alive by narratives about inflation, gas prices, baby formula, and culture war narratives, particularly those aimed at the LGBT community, trans people in particular. Those are all scoring big points. And right now, Democrats are down in the generic congressional ballot. The Democrats need to find something that resonates, and they need to do it in a hurry. And they need to coalesce around it. I don't know that telling people exactly how bad things are going to get in a non-democratic society will resonate, because people don't want to believe it, because we've all grown up with this narrative of American exceptionalism. America moves forward. We're great. We're good. We're a force for good. We are a democracy. That we can't possibly be fascist. That Americans can't have fascist instincts or want fascism. So we are highly resistant to truth and reality if it's unpleasant, and that's exceptionally difficult for people trying to craft democratic campaigns. Maybe the excesses of the Republican Party are the best place to start. I'm not a democratic strategist. All I am is somebody who thinks through the possibilities. I'm an analyst who thinks through the possibilities and tells you what you need to do mathematically and logically in order to get from point A to B to C. And right now, the only way we don't end up at point D, which is the collapse of American democracy in one way or another, sometime after 2024, is we have to retain the House, we have to have two more seats in the Senate, and we have to pass something that prevents that eliminates gerrymandering and prevents I'm trying to think of a right word, election skullduggery, shenanigans, things to steal the presidential election. And there's several different avenues Republicans are pursuing to be able to do that.
Well, how, for example, does the Roe v. Wade issue resonate? We are over 100 people, by the way, so we should have enough people to turn the election. The abortion issue, how does that play out in your scenario?
Well, one of the biggest problems is that there's not a lot of middle ground in the US. Most of us here are old enough to remember when Reagan won all but two, everything but Washington, D.C. and Minnesota in '84. And you don't see those kind of landslide elections. Most Americans are very locked in. And one of the biggest problems with Roe is, yes, it's going to get some people very, very angry, but the people that's going to get angry are generally the people who are going to vote Democrat anyway. I don't know, and the polling doesn't suggest that we're going to see this massive groundswell of anger directed at the GOP, because the people who do care already voted one way. And the vast majority of people don't care because they're not women of childbearing age who worry what would happen if they got pregnant and didn't want to, or they needed an abortion for medical reasons, or were sexually assaulted or something like that. So the number of people that the problem with the abortion issue is that abortion matters way more to the Republican base than it does to the general population. The fact that Roe versus Wade got banned and overturned, and there's abortion bans going in place everywhere, is actually a massive selling point for the Republican base. When Republicans get up there and try and convince the base to turn out, hey, I voted for the judges that ended Roe versus Wade, vote for me. Okay. And that's a good way of getting out the base.
Justin LeBlanc and Patricia Gresham. Justin LeBlanc, are you with us?
I'm here, and I resonate 100% with everything that BRYNN has shared. I appreciate her coming back on after she was here probably about 4 months ago last time. Spot on analysis. And I'd like to give an additional strategical standpoint from for all that. And that is, Martin Luther King Jr. said, if we don't give people economic freedom, their political freedom won't matter. And that is essentially what has been eroded since Nixon. In fact, she talked about Reagan, and a lot of the effort, including the abortion issue, was raised specifically for getting rid of a Democratic president and an inflationary regime. Look what we're facing right now. So what you mentioned, the Democrats and their lackluster performance, we'll just say the least of that one. And the problem comes down to, in the end, that they abandoned the supply chain, right? Not American jobs, not American self-development. We've gotten a hollow shell that has generally been passed along to outsourcing to foreigners, to outsourcing to corporations. In fact, Reagan's message was essentially this, right? Utilities are for suckers. That if you want to have success, you give everything away to the strongest men, and they'll.
Justin, can we get to a question, please?
But so the basic question here is: do we have the organizing power to get out, and not just get out the vote for this round, people like Nina Turner, so on and so forth, but to actually change the system so that its solutions, not strong men, are voted for? Things like ranked choice voting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've been talking about.
Okay, thank you. Brynn?
So that's a complicated question. The answer I would give is if Democrats consistently won elections and Republicans weren't overturning them, right, by 8+ points, right, at a national level, right, if we had blue wave after blue wave after blue wave election like we had in 2018, Democrats could have enough power if they decided to overturn the filibuster that they could retain the House, Senate, and presidency indefinitely. And so theoretically, yes, it is possible, exceptionally difficult, and it requires strokes of great luck. Because remember, Republicans have a 7-point advantage in the Senate in terms of Democrats have to win the national vote by 7 percentage points to break even in the Senate. So we would have to see 3+ election cycles in a row that look like 2018 to start implementing the things that we need to do, and we'd have to abandon the filibuster. That's going to be really, really difficult. One of the things that I've written about in my academic career was forecasting the collapse of democratic governments. And one of the things that I also did that went along with that was my work with counterinsurgency. And one of the fundamental concepts of counterinsurgency is that governments are weak when they can no longer provide essential goods and services to the population. And the data that I developed in my research showed that when you start seeing signs that governments are failing at the necessities, when you start seeing malnutrition, when you start seeing rising infant mortality rates, when you see declining life expectancy,
Right,
that's
and homelessness.
And homelessness. But I didn't look at that one because that wasn't part of the data set, so I can't comment on that intelligently with any, but it's the parts of the econometric data sets told me that a lot of the things that we've been seeing in the US for years and years and years were the harbingers of democratic collapse, that people turn to fascism, people turn to strongmen. And right now, it's going to be tough when people are experiencing gas shortages and food shortages and supply chain disruptions to convince them, no, we need more normalcy, when you have the demagogue on the other side that says, I will fix everything because I am strong, because I'm not going to put up with any of this dumb stuff. I alone can fix it, right? And that's the terrifying part, because they're never specific about how they're going to fix it, but they will fix it.
Right.
And that's dangerous.
That's what we're looking at in terms of, although Trump seems to have taken a hit, but I'm sure they'll find another guy to take his place. Patricia, Tatanka, and Wendy. Patricia, please. Patricia Gratian.
Yeah. Yes. We all know we're under. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We're all under assault in so many ways, and I just wanted to bring this up and see if there's a way to counter so many lies and deception. Here in San Diego, we have a candidate that has been attacked viciously with huge flyers, pretty much telling a whole bunch of lies about her. And if you look at who it's done by, it says New San Diego. So one telling thing is that New San Diego is an organization that does not exist, or it has not existed until very recently. So these are purely hit pieces, but they are very convincing. And they hit you again and again. They drown out everybody with their flyers. So how can one counter this type of an attack? Thank you.
So so yeah, you ask a good question, and that's something I cover in my book. It's very, very difficult to counter what's known as the Gish Gallop, which is the Gish Gallop is a rhetorical and debate technique where you lie and lie and lie and lie, and force your opponent to try and disprove all your lies. But it almost always takes longer to disprove a lie than it takes to spit it out there. And the result is that lying is a pretty good tactic to smear an opponent, or to muddy the waters enough that if you don't address every single one of those, if I accuse you of murdering the Pope, stomping on puppies, setting fire to babies, and being a communist, and you only get the first three, right? Well, people now think you're a communist because you never actually got around to rebutting that one. The only real way to rebut the Gish Gallop is to find an even better line of attack on your opponent that's completely true, right? That they can't rebut. Unfortunately, that takes a Roy Moore level of badness, or something like my opponent has promised to end Social Security. And when confronted about it, he said, well, if they didn't want to starve, they should have worked harder when they were younger, right? Something like that, right?
Rick Scott of the Senator from Florida has explicitly argued for abolishing both Social Security and Medicare.
Yes, that's the kind of things you go on the attack with,
right,
that are both true and terrifying. Whereas if somebody accused me of, I don't know, eating puppies, right? Well, it's a little hard to believe and seems outlandish, and I don't eat puppies, right? So,
but
you need better attack.
Is child molestation that they've come up with, which is completely sick and undeniable. But there it is. Tatanka Bricka, you want to jump in, please? And Wendy and Timothy.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, go for it.
Gotcha.
Okay. Thank you for being on, BRYNN. BRYNN, I hope you can stay in the next hour, because Danny's going to be bringing up Roe and Alito, which he was supposed to talk about 3 weeks ago, and that's one of the things he's going to be talking about. So that somehow the solution to this is we have to get to the underlying, the purveyors and the consequences of the underlying lies. In this case, it's not just about childbearing women. It is going to affect all of us in dramatic ways. So I hope you can stay for that conversation and be a part of it.
Yes, and
a little bit of it. I have another engagement at 6:30.
Okay, well, you get half hour anyway. So and that's good. And we're going to be dealing with energy issues as well.
Well, then for the audience, just know that you're going to have another opportunity to weigh in on some of this.
Yes, please. As I say, as Tatanka says, in the second hour, we're going to start with environmental issues, but then we're going to have Danny Sheehan and Tatanka Bricka to talk about a lot of this, opposition to fascism as well. We're really obviously, I'm thinking that Steve Bannon is running the Democratic Party because it is so incredibly ineffectual. As we saw in the rise of Hitler in Germany, you had a Weimar Republic that was completely lame and put up no resistance. And the Democratic Party is completely ineffectual. We have shown on this call repeatedly that grassroots campaigning can win. You have two people running, one in Texas, Beto O'Rourke, one in Ohio, Tim Ryan for Senate and governor, who are completely electable, but they're just running the usual Democratic worthless campaign that lost so clearly in Virginia, where we won in Georgia with the grassroots campaigning. So
I don't know if we can run against Steve Bannon and Alito, but it's worth a conversation.
Yeah, well, Steve Bannon is the you know, the evil genius, the new Karl Rove, behind the pro-fascist movement, and Alito has the power on the Supreme Court. Go ahead, Wendy Lederman, then Timothy. Wendy, go ahead.
Thank you. Sorry, I had to unmute. Thank you. No, that's actually like right. So my point is that like I just don't see the Democratic Party or progressives like having a viable candidate that wouldn't split the vote. So it's like we're really stuck with Biden. And just quickly, like to the point, like you mentioned, like the rise of the Nazis in the 30s, like, you know, and looking at the gerrymandering as the sum of its parts from all this, like where it's happening everywhere. Like I really see a coup. I think of like Smedley Butler. Most people don't know that there was an attempted fascist coup within America that happened that was uncovered by a Marine general in the 30s, and that was right before the Holocaust, before Germany. So that's really important. So just given these factors, like there's not a whole lot of issues that like everyone could kind of get behind. So I'm just looking like, what if, like, just in your opinion from your data, this kind of seems off, but like with the just the gas prices right now, like that's something that everybody can get behind. Like if there was some sort of like executive order, because it's all price gouging, really. So just kind of like if you could just speak to that in a sense, like if there was something that Biden could do that would address the price gouging of these oil companies and start to bring that down, like just from your data, does it look like something that everyone could kind of, that would have an effect anyway? Thank you so much. Thanks everyone. Thank you.
Go ahead, Bryn.
So I am not an expert on the limits of executive order authority. That's going a bit beyond my area of expertise. Yes, if Biden had some means of bringing down gas prices, bringing down inflation, and resolving the supply chain, yes, that would help him immensely. Other fundamentals of the economy are very strong. The housing market's still fairly strong. Joblessness is low. Wages are generally rising. They're just not rising as fast as inflation. You know, inflation is starting to level off and come back down, but I don't know that it's going to be in time. And yes, I agree with you. It's price gouging, but with the Supreme Court is the way it is, and even Democrats being like Joe Manchin and Sinema being hostile to raising corporate income tax rates and marginal tax rates, that's going to be, I'm going to have to assume that if there was a, you know, a magic bullet that Biden could use to fix those things, he would, because he knows it's probably going to cost him not just this election, but the next.
What about the student loans? What effect would this clearly has the executive power to abolish the student loans? How would that help?
I think it would help somewhat. What you really need to do, is the $10,000 he makes as is nice, but that's not what's crippling people. And that only really bails out a small percentage of young people. It needs to be higher for it to affect enough people that it's going to get him enough votes potentially that it might affect the election.
Okay.
I would say that it's an underwhelming measure that's not going to be enough unless he moves it up, because it only wipes out the debt of a small number of people.
What about the idea that he announces that he's not going to run again in 24? That's been floated.
Possible. I could see health reasons causing him not to do it. My sources say that Jill Biden's not thrilled about him running again, but internal polling also says that Harris does even worse than him against any theoretical Republican. And most sane Democrats recognize, even if they won't say it because they'll lose votes, that what's waiting for us on the other side of a GOP victory is permanent single party minoritarian control of the United States by a party that is absolutely bonkers and fascist.
Okay, we know that. I think a lot of people would probably assume that Harris will run but will not get the nomination. And there was, it's been floated that it will be a big plus in the 22 election if Biden said he's not going to run again. Timothy, Michael, Michelle, and then Dorothy Reich. We've only got 7 minutes left with this section, but Bryn is going to stay with us. Timothy, Michael.
Okay, one thing I wanted to bring up, and something that's kind of moved us in the direction of fascism, and that was the lockdowns pursuant to COVID-19 that occurred from 2020 to the present. And that destroyed a lot of the small businesses in the country. And that basically made the Amazons, the Walmarts, and the big board companies basically in control of the economic situation in the United States. And I also wanted to mention at the same time that the CDC, NIH, and the NIAID are 90% funded right now by the pharmaceutical companies. And that.
Yeah, that's not true. And we're not going to go with COVID denial or conspiracy theories that are absolutely not true. Those are federal agencies and they are funded by the taxpayers.
Okay, well, we'll have more dialogue on that. Thank you, Timothy. Let's move to Dorothy Reich. Dorothy? Dorothy Reich, are you with us? Did you have a hand up, Dorothy? Okay.
There we go. Okay, I got unmuted.
Go ahead.
I just remember that, you know, those of us who are old enough remember that Nixon had a price freeze, and I don't remember. It seemed to me that it worked. I don't know what anybody else has to say about inflation and price controls, but I just remember I couldn't afford a can of tuna fish, and then I could.
Well, I'm for a price freeze, especially on tuna fish. That would be really, really helpful. Very quickly, Nancy Naparco, did you have a, thank you, Dorothy, anything else? Dorothy? Dorothy, right?
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Excuse me?
Barbara Breeze is on the call. That's my sister. She's in Alaska.
Barbara Breeze, very quickly with Bryn. You have a story I think everybody's find interesting. There's a candidate running for Congress against Sarah Palin in Alaska, and he goes by the name of Santa Claus. I don't know if he was born that way, but can you say he's a progressive?
Yes, he actually is. So he actually he changed his name in 2005 to be more credible in a tour he did, visiting every governor's staff and U.S. senators' staffs throughout the country, discussing the plight of vulnerable children. So that's why he changed his name. He's no joke, believe me.
So is it possible that he could defeat
yes.
Sarah Palin?
Yes, absolutely. I think he's ranked 4 now in the state, but there's so much. I think people realize Sarah Palin is not good for Alaska, although, you know, many of the conservatives, I don't know, but he's got a good chance now.
All
and
right,
it's surprising. He's getting a lot of publicity, and he is so he's running for Don Young's seat, who was in the House of Representatives.
Right.
And
I think it would be only fair if Sarah Palin would change her name to the Wicked Witch of the North. I think that would be appropriate. Oh, thank you for that, Barbara. We will watch for Santa Claus. And does he have a big white beard and stuff, or how? He does. You're muted. Well, Barbara, you're muted here. Okay, anyway, thank you for that. We appreciate it. Bryn, we're almost to the top of the hour. Thank you, Barbara. BRYNN TANNEHILL, is there anything you want to add to us before we switch over to Taka Bricka and Danny Sheehan?
So the one thing I would like to ask everyone to do is, if things don't go our way in 2022, fight for it like hell. But And if things go the way we unfortunately expect in 2024, I need people to please pay attention to what I'm writing, because there's only a limited number of options and we need to start thinking about things differently. What you have to understand is that post 2025, 2024, if somehow we don't pull out the elections, that it is no longer possible to return to normalcy. That we will almost certainly be beyond a point where we can vote ourselves out of the situation.
Well, let's work at, thank you for that. And let's work in the meantime to see if we can avoid this fascist coup that has been brewing in this country for so long. Thank you so much. I do write about this in my People's Spiral of U.S. History. Bryn, I'll send you a copy. You can take a look, and I hope you'd review it. But we are now at the top of the hour. We have 104 people with us. And Tatanka Bricca, we're going to start this second hour. Bryn, you'll stay with us, I hope, and so many more of you.
For a little bit. I have to eat and then go to my next thing.
Okay, so we do have some major environmental news. Ron Leonard is on with us. We might as well start the hour with the good news, and we'll talk to Pat Morita about what's going on. Justin LeBlanc, I know you have a hand. We'll get to you. But Pat Morita will tell us about the latest craziness in Ohio, and we'll get into the nuclear thing. But let's start with the good news for today. Tatanka and Ron Leonard, if you can tell us about the lifting of the whatever is going on with the solar panels, that would be good. So Tatanka and Ron, jump on in.
So the good news.
Go ahead, Ron.
The good news is an industry that employed over 250,000 people that was threatened with having 100,000 of those people suddenly out of a job. And the residential portion of that industry, 20% of those companies threatened from basically going out of business, is now having a new life because the Biden administration has decided to take administrative action and support the idea that we can take actions against foreign interests, China in this case, and we can set up manufacturing of products, solar panels in the United States, and we can postpone any action that would prevent the industry from continuing to work this year by not instituting a tariff until the case is settled.
Great. So that's going to open the floodgates, we hope, to solar panels. Simultaneously, however, these idiots, and I use the term advisedly, in the Biden administration,
the technical term,
are pushing nuclear power. And we have a movement in California sponsored by the King Kong, coal, oil, nukes, and gas, to keep Diablo Canyon open. And for those of us who live in Los Angeles, this is absolutely terrifying, beyond any sane calculation. I want to have Pat Morita, who stayed with us through the hour, tell us what they're doing in Ohio, and then we'll go deep in and talk about California and this nuclear issue, and then we'll get to Danny Sheehan. I don't know if Danny's with us yet or not. Go ahead, Pat. Pat Morita in Columbus, you want to tell us what these idiots in the Ohio legislature are doing?
Yeah, well, hi, everybody, and thanks so much, Harvey, for all of this. And it's really mind-boggling. But in Ohio, the Ohio House has passed this bill 434, and it's now being heard in the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee. Although the legislature does recess at the end of this week, so it won't be further heard until the fall. But this bill would dip into Ohio Treasury, another taxpayer subsidy, to fund a new, it's called an Ohio Nuclear Development Authority, which is similar to a state agency. And that would research and develop advanced, or of course we call it new nuclear, it's not advanced, reactors. The bill is 14 pages long. The first 8 pages describe a really convoluted process for selecting board members for this new authority. And this process is designed to circumvent the public from being on the board. And even the governor cannot choose members of this board. He has to choose board members from a nominating committee that the first 8 pages of this bill talks about how they're going to choose the members of this board. That leaves 6 pages for the rest of this bill. The bill is like completely misrepresented by the sponsor. It said it doesn't include eminent domain. And I won't go into all the details about it, but there's just, what could it do? We don't know how much it would pay out of the Treasury. We don't know how long it would exist. We don't even know if the mission of this bill could change. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to just how people can get involved. We asking people to write one letter and use it in 5 ways. Send it to, if you live in Ohio, send it to your senator, then call your senator. If you don't live in Ohio, you can send it to the 13 members of the Ohio Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee. That's the committee that's hearing it now. And then anybody, anywhere in the country or anywhere in the world actually can send in opposition testimony. So we'll get back with you when we know if that is going to be heard. It's probably going to be heard in the lame duck when they pass all this stuff that nobody, really wants to be known for voting for. Then so probably look for it to be heard after the election. So that's my update. And I'll put that in where how people can help into the link.
Okay, so thank you for that, Pat Morita. And nationwide, we have 92 reactors. They're an average age of 39 years old. They are all apocalypses in progress. And in California and Michigan now, the Biden administration, with the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, is that whatever her name is, former Michigan governor, are pushing funding to continue operation of nuclear plants that are scheduled to shut or even have been shut. We just celebrated the shutdown of the Palisades reactor in Michigan, which had tremendous, really dangerous flaws in its operating capabilities in terms of the decayed physical plant, lack of maintenance, complete obsolescence, nowhere to store the waste, emission of carbon, of heat, of radiation, you name it. And they shut Palisades early because there was a technical problem. And now the so-called Democratic Secretary of Energy is pushing to reopen Palisades. I mean, it's absolute insane. And now in California, where this deal was cut in 2016 to shut Unit 1 in 2024 and Unit 2 in 2025. And these people have gotten to the governor, and they're now looking for federal funds to extend the life of these 2 reactors, notwithstanding the fact that they're surrounded by a dozen earthquake faults, that they have embrittlement, at least in Unit 1, which is extremely dangerous. You have an aging workforce that was already set to retire, and there will not be enough really sufficiently skilled people to run those 2 jalopy reactors. They have an illegal cooling system. They lose $3.5 million a day over the cost of renewables, which means keeping Diablo open every additional year will cost the people of California $1 billion to keep these 2 reactors operating, which are 45 miles from the San Andreas. So, and that's just the beginning of it.
Although we do have Danny on the call now. So
yes, Danny's on. So Tatanka, we want you to talk very quickly about how we're doing in California against this attempt to roll back rooftop solar and for your efforts to install the Green New Deal, and then bring on Danny to talk about the key issues that we face.
Okay, well, I'll keep this rather brief. Last Thursday, there were again rallies and demonstrations both in LA and in San Francisco in Sacramento. And they were both pro rooftop solar to end the gas tax in California. I was at the one in LA, which had nearly 1,000 of us.
Wow.
We had T-shirts saying, "Don't tax the sun," don't tax away rooftop solar. It was a really spirited, I think, very effective rally, and we all got on our computers and sent messages to the governor, which we are continuing to do. It was basically just a rehash of what they presented in December, a little bit less of the tax, but it's basically the same thing. So everybody is very aware that unless we get to the governor and unless we keep up the pressure on them to expose that they're in a losing position, because 4 out of 5 people in California want rooftop solar. They understand the importance of it. So that was a very positive development. Again, it's what prevented the tax from going through in the first place. And so, stay tuned. But that was very helpful. And in Sacramento, they also went into the CPUC gathering. So I want to introduce Danny Sheehan, who most of you know is the co-founder with his wife, Sarah Nelson, of the Romero Institute in Santa Cruz, California. Prior to that, the Christic Institute, and the Romero now is working on both green energy, have been doing it for years, and with the Lakota People's Law Project, the thrust of the green energy has been Let's Green California, which is a 3-year thrust with legislation. And Danny is here to talk about what he was asked to talk about 3 weeks ago, which is the danger of the Roe versus Wade, especially the Alito thing that he wrote that Danny can talk about, because it's far beyond going to affect women bearing children. And also any comment you want to have on solar, nuclear, and Lakota people. So welcome, Danny.
Welcome, Danny. I want to have you with us. I want you to know that BRYNN TANNEHIll is on, a great author and scholar in the coming of fascism. We also have Chuck O'Neill still with us. Chuck opened the a dialogue today with a presentation of a very important case in Florida for natural rights, for nature. And as an attorney and with a long history in this, you and Chuck should be in touch with each other, and you should see the particulars of his state level case. Other than that, we were discussing, of course, the indigenous view of a woman's right to choose and the sovereignty that they would have on reservations, and then whatever you want to jump into. We're honored to have you with us. So thank you.
And BRYNN also talked about the difficult road that we have coming ahead if we don't keep the House, get the Senate, basically fascism right around the corner, and the importance of this coming demonstration. There was some talk about how can we get a narrative that can energize the people to win these elections. So go ahead, Danny. Nothing small.
Okay, let me take those one at a time. No,
well, look, first of all, Danny, you win the prize for best shirt on the call. So thank you.
Oh, good. Well, we're here in California. You got the best backdrop. Mine is just a bunch of books here. So look, as we all know, our entire progressive community is in this peculiar stage where it's sort of like with the Golden State Warriors, where you find yourself behind by 10 points halfway through the fourth quarter. But you got Steph and the other shooters that are in the wings here, ready to unload. And so we don't want to despair that there's an awful lot of tide running right now toward fascism. There's no doubt about it. I mean, even CNN and MSNBC can recognize what it is that's happening here. They still haven't come to grips with what the real source of the problem is. They're all just whacking away at symptoms, but there are several symptoms that we can talk about here that are indicative of the larger dynamic that's going on. That which of course confronts us with the midterm elections coming up in November. So the bottom line is that everything that we are going to be talking about and everything that we should be doing should be, as you were pointing out, Lego, is directed toward figuring out a narrative that we can communicate to the voting public that will motivate them to say we cannot allow the Republican Party to take over the House and Senate here in the midterm election. And the numbers are not looking favorable right now to the success in being able to stave off this major offensive on the part of the right-wing Republican Party trying to seize control of the legislature. We're going to see coming up Thursday night here the opening of the January 6th hearings on the part of the Democratic Party, attempting to set forth what I think they have almost plighted their troth with, of assuming that this narrative that they're going to be setting forth is going to motivate enough people to split off from the Republican Party and enough of the independents to shift over to preserving Democratic control over the House and Senate. And that's where the Democratic Party is going right now, that they've really loaded all of their eggs sort of into this basket. And the rest of it is defensive, trying to figure out how to push back against the various state statutes that are trying to limit voting capacity, limit early voting, limit the number of voting places, in lower income neighborhoods, et cetera. We know what the activity is that's going on right now. But there's a couple of them that I want to talk about now. And then I want to leap to that these are in fact symptoms of the larger problem, and then close with talking about the larger problem again of what we can do about it. But there are two United States Supreme Court cases that the court has already agreed that it's going to be taking. The one big one we're all talking about is the abortion case. That's Dobbs versus the Jackson Women's Health Center in Mississippi. And this state statute has prohibited any abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. Now, what they've done is they've intentionally attempted to violate what Roe versus Wade established some, 50 years ago, this classic 3-trimester analysis, in which they've asserted that the states themselves are without constitutional authority to invade into the first trimester of pregnancy, that there's not an adequate state interest to be protected during this period where there is a non-viable fetus. And then they've also asserted in Roe versus Wade, however, when you get into the last trimester of a pregnancy, that the technology that's available now indicates that the embryo could in fact be sustained ex utero, could actually live outside of the woman's body and be sustained by technology. And so that they've said, therefore, the state has a legitimate and protectable interest in sustaining that life, which is now viable outside of the woman's body, and that they will be pretty indulgent of allowing different types of regulations to be passed by the states governing the rules and regulations regarding a woman's right to terminate a pregnancy that far in. And as we know, that there's the middle trimester where they will look at each law separately. But what's happened is the state of Mississippi and others have passed various statutes invading that analysis, saying that they're going to outlaw an abortion prior to the third trimester, and actually prior to the middle semester. So that this bottom line challenge to Roe versus Wade has resulted in Alito drafting a majority opinion for the Supreme Court that people have heard various things about. My guess is that of the 100 people or so that we have online right now, there probably aren't more than 10 of us that have read the opinion. That we've all read discussions of it, opinions about it, but the opinion itself is an extraordinarily sophisticated opinion. That there have been an awful lot of kind of simple characterizations of Alito's opinion, which are not exactly accurate. They're being articulated to attempt to generate the maximum degree of fear on the part of advocates of a women's right to choose. Let me get rid of these. Oh, just 1 second. Okay, Leo, I'm in a Zoom. Can I call? I'm free to call her. No, Zoom. I'm in a Zoom. It just seems like a Zoom.
BRYNN TANNEHILL, I know you have to leave soon, so thank you for being with us. And give us some. BRYNN TANNEHILL's got to leave, Danny. So if you make sure you say goodbye to her. Unmute yourself.
Okay, what I just want to say this is that this opinion that Alito has written is an extremely sophisticated opinion. You can tell there are Federalist Society law clerks all over this thing. And this is very sophisticated, and it presents a substantial challenge, not just to the right of women to choose, but also a threat to other fundamental rights that have been recognized by the Supreme Court during the last 35-year period. Okay. But the important thing to point out here is that almost certainly there's going to be at least one concurring opinion among the 5 judges that make up the majority in this case, that the opinion for the majority of the court has been assigned to Alito by Justice Roberts, but there's going to probably be one of the other 4 judges that make up this majority are going to write a concurring opinion. And they're going to pull back from some of the implications of Alito's opinion. Now, the progressive community is making hay while the sun shines here to characterize Alito's opinion as dangerous as it is. But the likelihood is that there's going to be a more, if you can use the term, a more moderate concurring opinion that doesn't go as far as Alito does. And that's going to be the actual opinion of the court. But what Alito has done here is he has mounted not only an assault on Roe versus Wade, but he's mounted an assault on any of the other unenumerated fundamental rights that the Supreme Court has recognized over the last 35 to 40-year period. And that what he's asserting is that in order for any fundamental right to be recognized on the part of a citizen, the citizen has to bear the responsibility for carrying the burden of persuasion that such a fundamental right exists. And he's erected a whole series of barriers to that, saying in a sense that the state is a plenipotentiary, that it can pass whatever rules it wants to, can infringe upon any of the basic assumed liberties of an individual person that they choose to, unless the citizen can make an argument, a persuasive argument, that her or his fundamental right that they're asserting over and against an assertion of state power is well grounded in history, that there's a long tradition of this fundamental right being assumed, that is clearly delineated and articulated, and thirdly, that it's viewed by a vast majority of people in the country to be an absolutely essential element of any system of order and liberty. And so what he's done, in short, is placed this heavy burden on the individual citizen to argue on behalf of her or his fundamental right, granting to the state the presumed authority to articulate whatever restrictions they want. Now, that's the danger of this particular case that he has cited here. And he's gone on to make an argument that under this test, the quote, right to abortion doesn't count. as any fundamental right that's been grounded in the history and tradition of the country, that is clearly enunciated and limited, and in fact is viewed as an essential aspect of any system of ordered liberty. He's saying it doesn't qualify. Okay, and that's his limited opinion. But he goes on to attack a lot of other fundamental rights: the gay rights, the right to have access to contraception, the right not to be sterilized. You know, there's a whole series of these fundamental rights that have been recognized by the court, the Supreme Court, over the past 35 to 50 years.
Well, Danny, let's talk about them. The right to be gay at all was established in the 80s. The right to gay marriage, of course, is recent.
Yep.
The right to contraception, you mentioned.
Yep.
What other rights are we talking about? We should have the list that are in jeopardy here.
Yeah, well, those he in fact sets forth a list of these. He sets forth a list of these in the almost any of the rights that have come to be recognized, other than those that relate to racial discrimination. For example, the right to marry a member of another race, right, which for years was banned by all kinds of states. That has been acknowledged by them to be grounded in the 14th Amendment right not to be racially discriminated against. Okay, but these others, the right not to be sterilized, the right to have a right to make decisions about your children's education, your right to access to contraceptives, the right to an unmarried couple to have access to a contraceptives, or an individual person, the right to gay marriage, these series of fundamental rights that have been recognized down through the last 35 or 40 years, that he has put all of those in the crosshairs. And he's gone on to argue, that there's really no standards in the 9th Amendment where it says just because we've articulated a series of fundamental rights in the first 8 of the amendments to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, just because we've identified these fundamental rights doesn't mean that's all there are. There are, in fact, others that are retained by the people. That's an absolute declaration in the Constitution. What he has said is that those are going to be almost non-existent. The founders have articulated a set of very specific ones, and therefore we have to recognize those. But I can tell you this: he's recognizing those only over and against the federal government. The bottom line with Alito is that you can tell in the opinion, he does not really believe that the 14th Amendment, passed in 1868, was intended to do anything other than to protect members of the Black race previously enslaved from the equal protection under the laws. And that's all that he believes that it really does. And that therefore he's trying to penetrate down through to have the states become the same plenipotentiary power that the kings and queens used to be in Europe.
So immigrants may not have rights, nature may not have rights because it's not enumerated.
Nothing like those. No,
Yes.
Nothing like that. You know,
So theoretically then, if the state of under Alito's rubric here, if the state of Mississippi, just to choose a likely suspect, decides to make it illegal for a Black person to marry a white person, which was protected in Loving,
yep,
he is saying that the state of Mississippi now has that right.
No, quite the contrary. He is saying that as long as the right that you're talking about is rooted in prohibiting or is in exercising a right not to be discriminated against based on race, that will survive.
Okay,
it's everything else. It's everything else. It's everything else. Like
Mississippi could step up and ban gay marriage.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And not only that, but they're going to be able to go back and say they are banning any kind of an abortion, not just after 15 weeks, but from the moment of conception. And that's what's going to immediately follow. What's going to immediately follow the ruling in this case is one or more states coming forward and reinstituting their old anti-abortion laws, that any abortion from the moment of after conception is going to be prohibited. because Alito very clearly points out right at the beginning of his decision, he's saying the right that is being asserted here is the right to terminate another life or potential life. That's how he's characterizing the right that's being asserted here. And he's asserting that any state may well have the right to do that if they choose to.
And the basic issue you're saying was that in the way the Constitution was created is that we have not enumerated all rights that citizens and humans have. There are unenumerated rights that are still inherent in humans, and he's overturning that.
What he's saying is he's going to try to set up a procedure pursuant to which those can be restricted to the absolute minimum rights, and that these more recently acknowledged rights of gay marriage and right to contraception and these kind of things are not included because they're not grounded in long-term history, because abortion has been outlawed in the country. There was never any right to practice contraception. There's never been any of these rights that have been recognized in the past. And so what he's going to do is try to wipe out all of those. And he's inviting various states to come forward and attack each one of these fundamental rights. It's an open invitation.
So in the 1980s, police broke into a motel room and arrested two gay guys. And the Supreme Court found that to be unconstitutional. Now he's going to overrule that and say if Mississippi finds two gay guys in a hotel room or two gay women, they can break in and arrest them, and it's legal.
But not in this case. He's not striking it down in this case. What he's doing is opening the door. He's opening the door for the right wing to come back and start filing lawsuits to undo those kind of precedents, because he doesn't believe that those are adequately historically grounded in American culture.
What about science that didn't exist when the founders created the Constitution?
Well, it does. He is an originalist. And he's one of these people that said, look, you take a snapshot of what the founders were thinking at the time in 1789, and that's it. That's it.
So let's take this. I've just written my book emphasizing the importance of the indigenous. And if he's saying basing this on common culture, the reality is that the indigenous who were here for 20,000 years never had a question about women controlling their own bodies. And at the time of the white person's constitution, 1787 to 1789, you had the Iroquois Confederacy and all the other indigenous tribes and nations practicing what we would call abortion, but women using herbal means to control their reproductive choices without any question at all. So if you want to have historical precedent on North America, the precedent of indigenous cultures having women control their own bodies is 20,000 years older than what happened in the last 200 years.
Except that he's not talking about the historical traditions of North America. He's talking about the historical tradition of the white established constitutional government of the United States. So that's all he's talking about.
Right. So the question then becomes: we do have sovereignty in the 1830s opinion written by John Marshall, where the Cherokee were denied statehood, but told they had sovereignty, which led, among other things, to the foundation of the casinos. Why could not the indigenous claim sovereignty, claim historical precedent, and establish abortion clinics beyond the laws of the states?
Well, I can tell you it's not going to happen. I can absolutely guarantee you it's not going to happen, because the indigenous people, the vast majority of the indigenous people that we've dealt with, view the abortion process as a means of eliminating their race, very specifically. In fact, the first elected woman to be the head of the tribe of the Lakota in Pine Ridge was removed from office and recalled for wanting to put up an abortion clinic on the reservation. That they view this as a white conspiracy to limit the birth of Indian people, and so it's not going to happen.
What about other rights? What about access to reproductive health? What about gay rights? What about gay marriage? Would the reservations with their sovereignty be able to defy the states on those issues?
Well, the problem is that they're not. going to be defying the states. Those are all white interloper ideas. You know, the long traditions of the traditional people that we know are really quite conservative, actually. You know, they're not that progressive. We have lots of difficulties now trying to enforce the right of free speech, the right to get to vote, the right to get to do all kinds of things on the reservations, that most of the tribal councils are not supportive of those things. And you know, and our progressive allies are saying, oh, please, let's file a federal lawsuit and make the tribe recognize these fundamental rights. But the tribe isn't inclined to do it. And I've always.
What about, pardon me, what about the sovereignty issue as it relates to Indian Child Welfare Act and what's happening that could threaten the sovereignty of the nations themselves?
Well, this is one of the other cases, one of the two cases I was talking about. The fact is that after the occupation at Wounded Knee back in '73, and the killing of the two FBI agents later on in the following year, the United States Congress established an American Indian Policy Review Commission, and Jim Aberesk, the Democratic senator from South Dakota, was the chair of that. And they held 2 years of meetings. And the only thing that they passed out of that whole confrontation was they passed the Indian Child Welfare Act in 1976, saying that, look, there's a real fundamental problem here, is that the white dominated departments of social services in the states are taking Indian children away from not only away from their mother and away from their mothers and fathers, but also from their aunts and uncles and grandparents, from their entire tribe, and they're adopting them out or putting them in white foster care systems. And they're doing the same thing that the old boarding schools used to do, to try to remove them from their culture and assimilate them into the white culture. And so that they drafted this law, the Indian Child Welfare Act, which mandated that in the case when a state Department of Social Services finds it necessary, at least in their minds, to take the child away from the mother, that they have to give preferential placement to the grandparents, to the aunts and uncles, to the cousins, to the other tribal members, to have them be given preference in either adopting or being foster care parents. And what's happened now is the American Association of Adoption Attorneys, that has been making up to $100,000 per child that they seize basically off one of the reservations. They have filed a lawsuit asserting that the Indian preference for placement of an Indian child is racially discriminatory against the would-be white adoptive parents, and that they're being discriminated against. And that case, that we won that case, but at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, but the United States Supreme Court now, the new 5-6 judges, have reached down into the Fifth Circuit and taken that case up to the United States Supreme Court. And what we're dealing with right now is we're filing an amicus brief on that. It's not going to be argued until the beginning of October, when they come back into session. But it's the other big case that's up in front of here. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to roll back the recognition of the tribes as sovereign entities. They don't believe that they're a political entity. They're arguing that they're a race, and that this is racial prejudice on behalf of a given one race, and it's discriminatory against white citizens. So this is another one of the two major cases that are up in front of the Supreme Court right now, where they're basically the new majority, that 6-person majority, or the real ironclad 5-person majority, with Justice Roberts kind of going back and forth on these things, that they are attempting to basically promote and promulgate the entire Federalist Society agenda of trying to roll the country back to the state of consciousness that it was in back in 1789. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get it all rolled back there by going into the state legislatures and adopting laws that mandate that we return to that narrow vision of individual liberty, and thereby empower the states to pass whatever laws they want, restricting whatever fundamental rights they choose to. That's what's really going on here.
It's amazing. It's true, man. We're talking with Danny Sheehan. Everybody, we still have 90 people with us. about some of the legal stuff that we confront, we will start taking questions. I want to know one positive thing that has happened, which is the Postal Service, which is being raped and pillaged by this fascist lunatic that was appointed by Trump. The Board of Governors now of the U.S. Postal Service has a Democratic majority finally. And we should be pressuring them to get rid of this guy named Louis DeJoy before he completely destroys the U.S. Postal Service. But hopefully the change of balance on the board of directors will have an impact. So BRYNN TANNEHILL was talking, and we were all talking about the coming of fascism. And Danny, what can we do in the 2022 election to mitigate as much as possible what we expect to be a bloodbath? I mean, I think Steve Bannon is running the Democratic Party. It is so worthless and useless and such an impediment to democracy. What are you working on that could help us?
Well, here's what I would say. It's important to maintain a proper perspective in attempting to establish a narrative that average people in the country will be motivated to respond to. There's a temptation on the part of the progressive community to overstate, even under the point of misstating what the nature of the real problem is. This is exactly what the right wing has done, of course. The right wing has vastly misrepresented the dangers that are being presented to them because they hold the average people to be in such low regard that they can bamboozle them with just complete bullshit, theories of, QAnon conspiracies and everything else. That we have to be very careful not to fall prey to the same temptation to oversimplify and over dramatize how awful things are right now. For example, it's important to remember that even Hillary Clinton, I will say even Hillary Clinton, won 3 million more votes than Trump won. That there's a very substantial majority of the American people who believe in these fundamental rights and these fundamental issues. And what we have to do is we have to try to figure out how to mobilize other people that are in different parts of the country that believe us and agree with us. The bottom line is the old adage, you have to get out and knock on people's doors and go to visit the people and share with them the full honest implications of what's going on now and get them to vote. Because you remember, almost only about half of the people in the country even vote. Especially in these interim elections here, where you don't have a presidential candidate on the ballot. That we've got to get our people to come out and vote. We've got to give them something to vote for, not just against. We got to give them something to vote for, and that's why I think that the social democrats, the democratic socialists, and the progressive element in the Democratic Party has to mobilize to basically take control of the Democratic Party. I mean, that's what really has to happen here. We've got the largest caucus in the entire Congress. We've got almost like 100 members in the progressive caucus. What we've got to do is be able to articulate a full set of very progressive policies and explain to the average people how these benefit them. Break that big mythology that everybody's daughter and son are going to become millionaires. As long as we let the millionaires do whatever they want. We've got to be able to articulate a full agenda of a social democratic agenda, and we've got to get it out to the people and get them to understand why this is beneficial to them. But one of the major problems that I've mentioned before, within the progressive community, there's not a really clear worldview that's grounded in any kind of metaphysics or any kind of theological understanding or any kind of metaphysical understandings. That there's a tendency to everybody say, let's just return to kind of an indigenous spirituality, kind of an organically grounded pagan kind of relationship with nature. That's one alternative. But there's a lot more sophisticated understandings of our human species, our relationship to nature, their relationship to our evolution, all of these things. There's got to be work done on really fleshing out a coherent worldview that is supportive of all the progressive changes that we want to have. And you can look to a sixth paradigm worldview that goes all the way back into ancient Greece, to find out how you can articulate this. And you have to overcome the inconsistencies where they allowed slavery, et cetera. You have to what you have to do is dig into the mythos of the United States and the entire theory of natural law behind the Constitution and bring this to life. This is a fundamental natural law worldview that undergirds the entire Constitution. And what we've got to do is make war on behalf of the natural law view of the Constitution so that we can defeat these people that want to take a snapshot of what the consciousness was at that time and bring it up into the modern times. That's what we have to do.
And I think that it's important that the progressive movement, we'll go to Pat, has her hand up, then Eric and Justin. We have to remember on the progressive side that the majority of the American public supports Social Security, supports Medicare for all,
right,
supports protecting the environment, supports a woman's right to choose, supports equal justice for people of all colors, supports gay marriage, supports contraception, sex education, all these things that the so-called radical left supports in this country is supported by the majority of the country.
That is right.
And yet the right wing on the media just rants and raves about the far left, and the Democrats let it happen. That's what's so infuriating. The Democrats do not answer, and they go down into Texas to support an extreme right-wing guy, Henry Cuellar, over a wonderful young progressive woman. What do they expect the young people, the millennials of this country to do? It's just unbelievable. And they also, and this is the key and I'll stop, is they will not do grassroots organizing. And this is what we saw in Georgia versus Virginia.
That's right. That's
Georgia,
right.
Grassroots organizing was done, and we elected, as a historian, this is a mind boggler, we elected in Georgia a Black guy and a Jewish guy to the US Senate from Georgia with grassroots organizing, and then they blow it in Virginia, which has been trending left for a long time. So
that's what we have to do. We have to get down into the grassroots, do our organizing, do our public education. That's what we have to do. And so that, we can complain all we want about the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party is afraid of grassroots organizing.
Exactly.
They don't want the more radical people. They don't want the more profound citizen rights to be promulgated because they're fundamentally capitalists.
And we have to ask.
That's the problem with it.
Yes, they're corporate capitalists.
Corporate capitalists.
We have to ask ourselves what would have happened if in 2016 Bernie Sanders had gotten the nomination that we
would have won.
What would the world now look like? Because I think he would have beat Trump, but whatever. Pat Morita, you've had your hand up. Did you take it down?
Yeah, well, I wanted to just say something from the past, and I don't want to interrupt this particular discussion, but I just want to say that when you talked about the Palisades getting money from the Civil Nuclear Credit Program and that Governor Whitmer up in Michigan was trying to get money, and even though it's closed, reopen it, even though it was closed because it had problems. I put a link in the chat. Individuals and organizations can, through tomorrow, sign this letter to her, telling her to stop her opposition to or to allow it to close and stop trying to keep it open.
Well, thank you for that. That's very important. That's something tangible we need to do. Danny, of course, is a great veteran of the No Nukes movement. So this is in California, with Diablo Canyon, the same deal. This is outrage that these people would even think of keeping these nuclear plants open. It's absolutely terrifying. Eric Lazarus, go ahead, and then we haven't heard from Wendy or Lynn Feinerman next. But go ahead, Eric. Eric Lazarus, you got to unmute. Okay, hello. We have 86 people still on the call. We have 13 minutes. Steve Caruso, we're going to continue recording until the top of the hour. Thank you, Danny, for sticking with us on this. I do want to take this moment. Chuck O'Neill is right next to you on my array here. And Chuck and Danny, you should know each other. Chuck has filed a right to nature lawsuit in Florida. which is being heard in the state courts. And if you guys, you may want to exchange briefs here, or Chuck, make sure that Danny gets your legal filings, because it's a path-breaking lawsuit here, Danny, putting us on par with Ecuador and Pakistan and other countries where nature does have rights. So go ahead. Chuck, just say hi to Danny if you would, then we'll go to Eric Lazarus.
Hi, Danny. I'll put my email in the chat, and hopefully we can connect afterwards.
Okay, thank you. All right, Eric Lazarus, are you unmuted? Eric, are you unmuted? I guess not. Lynn Feinerman, you haven't spoken yet. Lynn Feinerman?
Yes, hi.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you for all your intelligence, all your care. And all I have to say is, into the bargain, it is the entire progressive worldview that Danny's talking about is being mimed and co-opted almost as we speak by the people who arrive at Davos for the World Economic Forum. And so I recommend highly that everyone read Davos Man by Peter S. Goldman, because it will take your breath away. I mean, they go, the pharmaceutical crooks go to meetings where they talk about how they should have communicated better. You know, it doesn't matter that they're ripping people off and that people are dying in droves because of their policies and because of their thefts. It's scary. I mean,
yeah. I think over the last couple of weeks, we've had a remarkable display of what a world-class jerk Elon Musk is. I mean, this guy, what a, I can't say it, but geez, you know, if money is any indicator of what kind of human beings we're dealing with, this show of Elon Musk has just been astounding. Myla Reeson, you haven't spoke yet. Myla? Myla Reeson, are you there?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Harvey, thank you so much. I just wanted to let people know that I posted in the chat the Mothers for Peace petition asking Gavin Newsom not to extend the operating of the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant. And I've got to tell you, both of those reactors are most definitely embrittled. It's just a question of one is more embrittled than the other, but they're both very dangerous. And I'm hoping that people will sign this petition. It's a new petition, and we can use all the signatures we can get.
Okay, very good.
It looks like somebody else just PDA also posted it as well.
Yes, thank you very much for that. Layman, thank you, Maya, and thank you for your great work on Pacifica. Next week, we will have a session on the Pacifica Radio Network, which is really under fire and desperately needs a dose of actual democracy. Myla has been a major, major factor in that, devoting tremendous time. Thank you for that, Myla, and we will talk about Pacifica next week. Layman Wexelbaum, you haven't spoken yet. Layman, go ahead.
Okay, can I be heard?
Yes, go, please.
Yes, we
Good, I'm unmuted. Okay, real quick, thank you for inviting me, Harvey. I'm Lehman Wexelbaum. I'm an independent reporter in New York City, in this case, putting a story together, perspective story together for the New York Daily News, which gives us a rare window of access into the mainstream media.
Okay.
What the subject of the story is, the scenario of Trump forces hacking into the actual vote count of the 16 and 20 elections, changing the actual numbers of the votes. That's, of course, what their side is saying the Biden side is doing. But we, I think, have a more credible case. We just have to fill in the gaps. So I simply want to say, if what we're looking for right now, given the perfect crime nature of the kind of cybercrime we're talking about, are the potential whistleblowers from inside the Trump camp or somewhere inside the computer camp. which will tell us in their deep throat way exactly what they know. It's an elusive search, but we think there may be somebody there. So if you have any info at all that can take us there, and we're also particularly interested in anybody who has the ear of Jill Stein, who of course was the point woman in 16, on looking into the case, but has maintained a strange silence on the case. There's a lot of strangeness to the story, which itself becomes part of the
all right.
story.
Well, okay, thank you, Layman. Thank you very much for that. Jill is strangely silent because she's been attacked by the Federal Election Commission and threatened with the loss of all her property, including her home. That's one of the reasons why she's been so strangely silent. Thank you for that, Layman. We will be in touch with you. Wendy Lederman, you and Danny, I don't know if you've been in touch before, but Wendy is one of the principal co-conveners. She's in Florida and a great activist. Go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm on the circle call with Danny. I always enjoy seeing him and hearing him. Thank you so much. And I'm super glad that you got to meet Chuck, because that ties in with just kind of going back to what you were saying with the narrative. It's the tangible policy, like with what you're doing in California and what Chuck's doing here in Florida. And just also what I see is what Harvey talks about with just, creating like establishing the motive that there's a coup happening, and I keep bringing up the part of like Smedley Butler, like everyone knows war is a racket, but they don't know that there was actually a coup that he uncovered, like an actual coup that he followed along for months and uncovered it to Congress. And these are the grandkids of these people. And so just establishing the narrative and presenting the tangible policies, like giving the answer, but then also really like hearkening in on the part where you mentioned before in the other meeting of enumerated rights belonging to the people, and then Chuck brought up corporations as people and just how this all ties together. So if you could just kind of speak to that. I'm sorry, I don't have like an actual formed question, but if you can kind of get what I mean from all that. Thank you so much. Great to see you.
Well, one of the major issues that arose at the same time there was the coup attempt against Franklin Roosevelt back in 1934 that was instigated by a lot of the partners in Brown Brothers Harriman. You had the DuPonts and the others that were involved in doing that. The reason that the confrontation was arising was because the major corporations had succeeded in getting their lawyers put into the federal judiciary in positions. And they were the ones that created this doctrine that was actually started in 1872, but that they brought it to full fruition by the time they got to 1934, that the corporation was a person. And that the corporation was therefore entitled to First Amendment rights that would not allow the regulation of their advertising. They could say anything they felt like saying, and that they had a right of any given citizen to express their own views, and that they were arguing that, for example, the imposition upon them of having to allow labor unions to organize in the corporations, they said that was a violation of their right to contract with individual members of the workforce. That entire confrontation arose over this concept that the corporations were people. And so that has to be done away with. And we all know that. I mean, because they've now, this Supreme Court has gone to the extent of saying that one of the First Amendment rights that a corporation has as a person is to spend as much money as they want to during elections. And so that they've now just come right forward. We're all the way back to the robber baron era of, overt bribing, bringing in, brown paper bags, cash, into the Senate, into the House of Representatives, just buying their votes. I mean, that's what's happening now. But we need to understand that one of the reasons why they're as successful as they are, or there are two reasons. Number one is, and we've talked about this before, it's important to understand that 27 states in our country, out of the total of states, 27 states elect 52 members of the Senate. In those 27 states that elect 52 of the senators out of the 100, they only contain 18% of the total population of the United States. That's incredibly important to keep in mind. And so that the real problem we're having here is with the United States Senate, is that these red states have, with only 18% of the population, they control 52 seats in the Senate. We've got the additional problem now that we've gotten the miracle of having West Virginia with Manchin, in Arizona with Sinema, be Democratic, and we can't even hold those two votes, right? But the bottom line is that we understand that the country is really much more liberal and much more progressive, in that if we can only get out to these people and work with them and get people to, when I went in, I ran the campaign for McGovern. Back in 1972, I ran the primary campaign for him in the 14th Congressional District, which is AOC's district now. But when I went in there, that was under the control of the head of the Senate, John Rooney. John Rooney was a Democrat, but he was a hardcore right-wing reactionary, and that we went into the 14th Congressional District on behalf of George McGovern, and went and met with everybody, every school board. We met with every PTA meeting. We went to every veterans meeting. We went to the YMCA meetings. We went to talk to everybody. And they were all extraordinarily grateful that someone had come to talk to them, and not talk down to them, but to find out what it is they were interested in, what they were worried about, et cetera. And the mere going and talking with them as equals caused them to vote. We won the 14th Congressional District, for McGovern. So we can do
exactly what Steve Bannon is now doing for the right wing.
That's right. That's exactly what he's doing.
And the Democrats are not answering.
No, the Democrats. I had the problem in New York State. The regular Democratic Party, they opposed mobile voter registration. The polling, the voter registration place in New York City was open from 9 a.m. in the morning until 4 p.m. in the afternoon. So no working people could actually go and register to vote. And so we set up mobile voter registration, and they tried to stop us. They tried to arrest our people. And so I filed the federal lawsuit, and we won, having the right to engage in mobile voter registration. And
we're at the hard deadline now. We got to get out of the room.
All right, Danny, it's been fantastic. I'm sorry, Ruth and Justin, we've run out of Zoom space. Danny, I hope you'll come back. We will be back again next week at 5 p.m. Eastern time. This has been, we still have 79 people with us, but we got to go. Thank you so much, everybody. We will see you next week. We will talk about Pacifica and much, much more. Another fantastic call.